happy to welcome everybody here today. I'm Rachel Duda, the Vice President of Learning at Vivi, and I'm so excited to talk with Dr. Ryan Padrez today about something I know is on everyone's mind right now, screens. Whether you have a phone attached to your hand or have sworn off technology, there's no denying that we're living and parenting in the age of screens. As a mom of 4 children, I can tell you that we have a love-hate relationship with screens in my household, and I'm constantly trying to figure out where I stand and what our limitations are. So we're so lucky to be joined by Dr. Ryan Padrez today, a pediatrician and clinical associate professor at Stanford University's School of Medicine, and he's an expert on this very topic. So together, we're going to do our best to address some of your pressing questions around screen time in young children and help you feel empowered to make better decisions around screen use in your family. I also want to thank our partner for this webinar, Noggin, for partnering with us on this event. Noggin is Nickelodeon's learning entertainment app that was developed by teachers and provides smarter screen time for children ages 2 to 7. Noggin's generously offering our Vivi community with a 60-day free trial, and we'll include the link to sign up in our post-event email tomorrow. So if you're not already familiar with Vivi, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what we do. We are on a mission to reinvent childcare and early learning for today's families. We currently have 6 campuses in New York and 1 new campus opening very soon in Westchester. And our campuses specialize in learning and care for children 6 weeks to 5 years old. We also partner with employers of all sizes to bring care and early learning to their working parents as a benefit. And we truly believe that it's our mission to support the whole family, not just with high quality care and learning, but also with education and resources for those early years, which is why we're hosting this conversation today. Before we get started, just a few program logistics and then we'll dive in. I just want to say that I appreciate so many of you joining us today. I know that there's so much on your plates and you have so much to do. And so we're really grateful that you could carve out some time to join us. We'll have about 45 minutes together, and we'll use the first 30 minutes to run through some questions that I've put together for Ryan, and then we'll go through some of your questions. The chat is open, and I see so many of you participating already. So feel free to drop in a question at any time during the webinar, and we'll do our best to get to as many questions in the time that we have together. And of course, 45 minutes is not enough time to go through everything on this topic, but we will do our best to send you with at least one practical tool or tip to help you feel better equipped to handle screen time in your own family. So with that, let's get started. Ryan, let's start by laying the foundation around screens and young children. What are the current pediatric guidelines for children in this age range 0 to 5 in regards to screens? What are the reasons behind them? And are there any new studies to note for this age group?
Great. Yeah, well, thank you so much for including me and inviting me to be here. This is such an important topic in pediatrics and one that pediatricians talk about often. And of course, parents are constantly struggling with. And so, I'm wearing a few hats here in today's conversation as a pediatrician who sees patients, every day here in our community in Northern California, but also a father of 3, age ranges now a little bit on the older side, 6 to 10. So just beyond what we're talking about today as more in the 0 to 5, but struggled through the same first 5 years and thinking about screens in my family as well. And so, so let's dig in. And then I just want to first, disclose that, anything I'm sharing today is my own opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of Stanford University or the American Academy of Pediatrics or other things that I sit on. So, but this is a great topic and great first question. So let's get into the guidelines that are out there. And so, first the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is our body that gives a lot of the guidelines to our practice, did issue an important policy statement in 2016. So note the year, it's before COVID, when I feel like the entire landscape of screens changed. Came out with a policy statement called Media and the Young Minds. And from that, there's a few important recommendations that pediatricians look to and a lot of guidelines for families. And they really break it down into I think about 2 buckets with these. The first is some guidelines for different age range of kids, 0 to 5, and then some recommendations and guidelines for kind of all kids. And so when we look at the age range, they first say, 18 months and under, so kids 18 months and under, they really recommend no screens unless maybe an occasional video chatting with family and friends. They then say around 18 months to 24 months, so that emerging 2-year-old could be a time when you introduce some screen-based media to your child, but to really pay attention to high quality content and make sure there's some co-viewership that happens. And then in the age range of 2 years old to 5 years old, the guidelines right now from the American Academy of Pediatrics recommend a limit to 1 hour or less of screen-based media time with your child, and to really, again, pay attention to high quality content during that age range. A couple other, what I actually think are maybe potentially more important guidelines throughout the rest of the policy statement are things such as no screens during meal times is their recommendation, keeping your child's bedroom screen free, making sure there's no screen-based media 1 hour before any bedtime or sleep, really trying hard to use screens as your main strategy to calm your child. Of course, okay with as an intermittent strategy like on a plane flight, but trying to avoid that. Not feeling pressure to introduce media early to your child, and that the sense that kids in today's sort of digital age are going to catch up no matter what age you introduce that media. And that it's really important to develop a plan, a family-based media plan, and how you're going to monitor what media your child's interacting with, and coming up with sort of that shared family plan. And so to get to your second part of that question, like what's this evidence base based on? Again, this is in 2016 when this is published, and I think there's a really important statement at the beginning of the guideline that still remains true to the day, which is everything we're going to talk about is the evidence and the research is still really limited in this field. It's a very hard space to study, and we can talk about a little bit why. But these guidelines come from on the positive side for screen-based media. There is some emerging evidence that kids, even as young as 2, can start to learn language and words from things like video chatting. And it's based upon a really robust literature that high quality educational screen-based time with a child, preschool age kids particularly, can learn skills like literacy, numeracy, and social emotional skills. And this comes back to all the way back to the 1970s studies with Sesame Street and others. On the concerning side, some of the evidence that was emerging as this policy statement was being written was showing, that excess use of screens, was associated with a small but significant risk of things like obesity. Screen time before bedtime was shown in like more of laboratory studies, but shown to really impact quality of sleep for young children. And then a more kind of emerging and robust literature that's showing that time-based association, so this higher time on screens, was associated with cognitive, language, and other social emotional delays in kids, which is where that time base came from. But, I just want to pause and make sure everyone understands some of the limitations on the evidence of this and why this is hard to study. And then we can talk about some of the newer studies and things coming up. But most of these studies that we're looking at are what I call like laboratory-based studies. They're not real world. So they're in a lab, they're set up in very specific conditions, and not necessarily what's going on in our homes today and how our kids use screen time. A lot of the content they study has been specifically designed to see, can the child gain, for example, a literacy skill or a numeracy skill? And it's not the same app that we're downloading on the App Store today. It's a different tool that's often there. I think most concerning in the study I want to make sure I highlight later on this morning is that most of these studies are based on parent report. So ask parents, how much media do you think your child's been using? And so we can all imagine where what I call recall bias might be in that, and what makes it then really hard to decide where are the real associations. I also think it's really hard to clump together 2-year-old to 5-year-olds in these studies. We all know if we have a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, or a 2-year-old and even a 4-year-old, they're at very different stages of learning and what they could potentially gain from technology or screen-based time. And so not only do these studies often lump together age ranges, they often lump together all screen-based media. And there's a wide range in that. There's high quality content that's out there, and there's some very, very low quality content that's available. But most of these studies don't break those two apart. And then the two things that I think are being kind of talked about a lot in blogs and media is that 1 hour mark that the AAP has on the guideline, potentially, which is very stressful for parents when they hear that 1 hour mark. That's a hard line to keep in many homes, especially when potentially schools are using a lot of screen-based media already in their program. It might be too restrictive for the 4-year-old or 3-year-old in terms of what the real impact may be. And this really focus on joint watching or joint engagement with the parent. Studies are starting to emerge that show that it actually really matters in the quality of that joint engagement, not if it's just there. So these are some of the things that are sort of percolating in my mind as I read through the literature and I looked at that guideline.
Great, thank you. And you talked a little bit about this piece, but and a couple of questions came through the chat just now too around this. Are there any exceptions around things like video communication? I know so many of us use FaceTime, Zoom, things like that to communicate with friends and family all over the place. So can you talk a little bit about that piece and how or if that might be different?
Yeah, and I think everyone's opinion of this has changed coming out of COVID. And, thank goodness for so much of the screen-based technology that we have today available during this COVID pandemic, as it enabled us to stay connected to so many family, friends, and in schools. Schools became so reliant on screen-based technology. And so even in 2016, the AAP guideline called out that, young children video chatting with family and friends could be looked at as acceptable, and that might be a really positive way to start to introduce some screen-based technology. And so I think today there's so much screen-based new tools that can promote these social interactions that were just not there before. Maybe it's the way parents can co-learn alongside their child in terms of what they can see. Tools that can spark children's curiosity around what to go find or explore outside. New ways to play games with other children, could be there. And so I think this is just emerging, but in terms of similar thought processes to how video chatting, what really that's saying is it's about social connection with other people that may not have been possible without that technology. And that could be okay for some of our youngest viewers.
Great, thank you. Thinking about slightly older children, and you talked a little bit about this, but can you talk more specifically about ways that screens can be beneficial, in that 5+ crowd?
Yeah, and this is where I think the literature gets stronger, is when you get to some of the older children. So, in my mind, I sort of prepared my comments today thinking about the 0 to 5. So 4 and 5-year-olds. Yes, there is more robust literature that preschool age children have the ability to learn new skills, academic skills, social emotional skills with screen-based media. And the key to that statement, though, is it has to be high quality and not just what I call entertainment media. And so we need to figure out ways to find trusted sources of what is high quality. Things like, PBS, Sesame, Noggin, some of the ones that we're more familiar with. And what are some of the tools we might use to vet that? And also when we think about screen media, it doesn't always have to be just apps or things we're watching. There can be other ways we use screens to more engage our children, especially 4 and 5. And so, for example, a really good one I think about is like Fitbits. That's technically kind of like a screen-based technology that's tracking things like heart rate and how many steps you have in a day. And so a really good example of that is I recently just took my family to Disneyland, which we can debrief another time of that. But I think one of the highlights of the trip was my youngest one, my 6-year-old, was wearing a Fitbit the whole time. And each day we were so proud of looking back at how many steps we took, and we did 50,000 plus steps in 2 days. And so pretty amazing. But that was just another way technology helped us sort of engage another way she was perceiving and interacting in the world. And I found that to be really healthy and fun.
Mm-hmm. I have a similar experience with my 9-year-old. He has a Fitbit too, and he likes to challenge himself to beat his prior day's steps, which I think
Totally.
really great.
Or they start to recognize their heart rate goes up when they run, or other, they're starting to, it's a technology that's enabling them to better understand how their bodies work and how changes they make, create changes in their own bodies. And so, and there was, there was a new study that came out this year in 2023, just a few months ago, that looked at 4-year-olds, and it's a pretty well done study. And one tidbit related to this question is that for the 4-year-olds that they looked at that were engaged in high quality screen media use, had more gains in what I call the executive function skills. So things like task orientation or assertiveness. And so that's a real positive gleaning from, and these were children that were using some words upwards to 4 and 5+ hours a day of screen media. And yet this was some of the positive things that they gained from it. So, again, it's just all pointing back to, I think some of the older kids can gain some skills. It's just being mindful of how we set some limits and making sure they're not getting engaged in lower quality entertainment that could come with more harm.
Makes sense. YouTube, that's in my house. Ugh.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second. So I think that's really an important comment. And so there was a paper done by, I think, one of the really thought leaders in the space, Dr. Radesky, who has helped write the guidelines at AAP around this and helps shape a lot of the tools that the American Academy of Pediatrics offers. And she published with her colleagues a really important paper in 2020 that looked at, let's take a real honest look at how much time are kids really spending in 3 to 5-year-olds on their devices, and what content are they really looking at? And so what the study was brilliant. And instead of just asking parents for recall, like, how is your child doing? They had an actual technology built into the tablet or phone, both Android and Apple, that monitored how much time the child was actually using the device and what content they were looking at. And then they asked the parents or caregivers, can you tell us how much time you think your child is using it? And no surprise to probably anyone here, there was significant error on the parent reporting. Upwards to 70% of parents in the study were very incorrect, either under or overestimating, but off by around 60 minutes a day. And so, what they found in reality, looking at it, was kids were on their devices for average of 115 minutes a day. And, again, nothing was too alarming or surprising there. But what was alarming to me was exactly what you just said is, okay, now what content are they really looking at? So this is 3 to 5-year-olds. They had about 350 kids in the study. And of course, number 1 and number 2 were YouTube-based, apps. And so we all know YouTube can be a very challenging app to monitor, as there's lots of different content there. Second thing, number 1 and number 2 were YouTube. The third one was web browsers in general. So, just looking online, followed by camera, followed by Netflix. And then all the way down at the bottom were some of our more higher quality, what we think about educational apps like Sesame and PBS and Noggin and things. And so, and that's the reality that I think we need to acknowledge. Like, again, we're talking about what can kids learn and what we can be hopeful for. But it takes real effort by parents to make sure that they're engaging in that higher quality content.
Absolutely. I struggle with that on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for sharing and kind of keeping along the same lines of things that you would advise parents not to do. I often hear parents, and I've been guilty of this myself, parents who use a screen as a distraction during meal times, whether they're out in public at a restaurant to reduce chaos and misbehavior, or at home to coerce children into eating. Is that okay? And like, what are the risks here? And are there any better substitutions?
Yeah, great question. So this comes back to sort of like, what are my 3 big no's that I talk about things in my visits with families today in pedi. I actually don't spend a lot of time thinking about time-based, this 1 hour, 2 hour marks. Instead, I think a little bit more about how families what are their family rules around media, and then I focus on these 3 things, my 3 big no's, which are no screens at meals, no screens right before bed, and keeping bedrooms screen free. And so to this point around meals, you know, there's absolutely occasions where you as a parent need a screen to help calm your child down. And I think a classic example is plane flights. For those that are flying with a 2-year-old or 3-year-old on a plane, it is a tough gig. But I can't imagine too many of us out there flying with our kids all that often. And so therefore, that occasional use of screens to calm the child on a plane feels okay. Now, but meals now, on the other hand, are something we do every day, all the time. And so using screens as that calming, strategy during meals, I think it starts to walk a slippery slope. And part of this comes from the evidence showing, again, what I talked about, higher screen time and that risk of obesity. And some of the theory of action there, theory of change on that, is that it reduces your satiety cues when you're watching screens. So meaning you don't even know when you're full. And so as you can imagine, a child definitely won't recognize that. So they're just continually eating while that show or screen is playing. And then you're also missing out on that engagement that happens during meals with other people around you. And so this is something that goes back generations of we eat meals together as a social sort of interaction of what we have. We have conversations and have different sort of engagements. And when you have media going, and we've all been at a restaurant where we look over at a table and all 5 kids are on a screen and the parents are also on their phones and they're
Yes.
not talking at all. And so I want to challenge families and caregivers out there that, especially, I think a lot about the morning time. In the morning, it's hectic. We're all trying to get out the door to get either to work, to childcare, and or preschool. And it's really easy to just flip on the iPad to keep your kids calm during breakfast so that you can finish making the kids lunches or finish getting your cell phone ready. And but just because it's easy doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And I want to challenge us all that I actually really believe our kids are capable of keeping calm during meals, and potentially even engaging with you as you're making lunches or finishing up your breakfast or doing things that could be a more healthy way to have screens in your life or part of that daily routine. So I guess I want to just put the challenge out there that don't underestimate what your kids can do. And it may not go well the first time or even the second, but building that skill I know our kids are capable of it.
I agree. And just to share a little tip of something I do with my 4 children, anytime we go to a restaurant, we bring a little what we call the fun bag. And in the fun bag, we have some pens and some paper and some crayons and things like that. And, we can play games on it like tic-tac-toe while we're out, and just things for us to do that will still, spark conversation and engagement that isn't a screen. And my kids really look forward to the fun bag, at restaurants. Yeah.
Absolutely. Like every time there's a tic-tac-toe game, on the kids menu, it's
Oh,
really
yeah.
one of my kids always asks, "Dad, can we play tic-tac-toe?" And that just wouldn't happen with the screen. It wouldn't be
Exactly.
the same thing. So now we're actually playing a game together there, and then it sparks another conversation,
Yep.
and leads to things. So I agree
Absolutely.
with that.
I love that. Um, so we talked a little bit about rules, and you mentioned this piece about like an hour of screen time a day. But sometimes, rules make children want to sort of like push the limits. And so, how some parents tell children they have an hour of screen time, children become obsessed with it. Whereas if parents don't create rules, the children sometimes are less interested. So how can you find that happy medium
Yeah.
between restricting screen time versus like making it an obsession?
Yeah, this is a great question. This is at the heart of all parenting challenges here. So I think when we think about that time-based limit, let's come back to what we're fighting up against, which is I think we all have to acknowledge that most screen-based media, not the high-quality learning kind, but the entertainment kind, is really designed to be, for lack of a better word, addictive. It is stimulating. It releases endorphins. It creates rewards for the kids when they do something, and it's it was built actually mostly with adult users in mind, and so that it really takes advantage of young children's cognitive, social, emotional vulnerabilities, I would say. And so when we sort of create this time-bound sort of rule going against something that's very addicting and stimulating to a kid, it's going to create those conflicts. So I try to move away from, I think it can be one rule and hopefully a bigger picture of rules and how your family might think about media. But I don't think it should be the only rule of this 1 hour limit that you put or 30-minute limit on certain times. Rather, flip it in my mind and think about what are the activities that you can use screens to do, and types of schoolwork, FaceTime with family, practicing typing, programs to work on your math, or created an art project or app, a story. Like flipping it to the positive, I think is a good way to do this. And there's a lot of tools out there now for families. The AAP has the family media plan. I know that Noggin has some tools. I know that Sesame has some tools to help families create these plans around media use in their house. And I would say that that's going to help you develop some more rules beyond just that 1 hour time limit that I think could be helpful. And questions that will fit into those rules are going to be things like thinking about, how are you going to allow your child to find which apps and shows they watch? How did you know they were high quality or age appropriate? Have you ever thought about creating like an unplugged weekend, for in the month? Or did you ever look into who actually designed that app and who owns it now in terms of which one your child's engaged with? So things beyond just the 1 hour time limit, but looking a little deeper and more holistically at the media use.
Great. And this question just came through and it's sort of related to this. So for those of us who have gotten into bad habits, like watching during meals or, YouTube, whatever it might be, what are some tips and tricks to limit screens if we've kind of gotten to a place that's less than ideal without causing a complete meltdown?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, I have a lot of confidence in the resilience of kids that they can quickly move to some different habits. But I think in those situations you're going to have to come up with a different activity to be doing during the meal that's not screen time. So the thing you just shared about the game bag that you bring with you to restaurants is a really cool idea. Maybe if it's at home, we're going to have to think about something else that the kids are doing during that meal time instead of screens. Maybe it's going to be working on sort of like an art and craft that's going on, during the meal, and slowly move away from making that activity to be smaller and smaller and less, and involved to the point where then maybe you don't need that activity at all.
Great. And just something we have in my house that parents might find helpful. There's some great like placemats and also table coverings that children can draw on and color in. So that might be something that just sort of lives at your kitchen table, your dining room table, whatever it might be. We have the markers right in the middle of the table, and my kids, at any point can just come by and start to color in on that. So that might be something to look into. So this is a big one. Yeah, this is a big one for all of us. Kids are sponges, and we as parents are their most important model. Unfortunately, we're also obsessed with our phones. And so how can we as parents set an example of healthy screen time for our children? Because again, they're watching us. And if we're on our phones all the time, what kind of message does that send? So what can we do?
Yep, such an important question. And one I struggle with this, we all do. We live in an age where we are very reliant on our phones, or very reliant on our own screens in our life. And so I frame this as children, are always watching, as you said, they're sponges to their environment. And I would say that they don't need to be, children don't need to be using technology to even start to be digitally literate. And so, and the way this is because how many of us out there have said, how did my child know how to do that on my phone? And wait a sec, they shouldn't have had that yet. And that's because they're watching us all day. They're watching us exactly how we engage with the phone and push buttons. And their brains are just amazing in terms of what they can put together as a puzzle of how to interact with this digital screen media. And so they know it because they've been watching. And so they really pay attention. They pay attention to when we're using screens during meals. They pay attention when we're using screens during their playtime. They pay attention to when we use screens when we're in a stressful conversation. And as maybe that's like our way we cope or calm our own selves down, that they're paying attention to that. They pay attention when we're bored as parents. We're waiting for something. What do? We often pull out our phone and look for it, for something to do. And so they're starting to accept all those behaviors as normal. And so we should, as caregivers and parents, should be paying attention to that. But they also pay attention when they see us using screens to connect with loved ones and FaceTime. They see us when we use our digital media to stream a music video and have a dance party in the kitchen. They see it when we, create a family movie night and we snuggle up on the couch together. So there's ways we can model positive interactions with screens as well. And I just think it's about being mindful to both. And again, there's tools out there now that knowing that how big a problem this is and how big a challenge this is, these family media plans or something else that's going to work for your family to sort of help you check in with yourselves to realize what are some of the boundaries you want to set for yourself.
Great, thanks. Just to remind everybody, the chat is open. Feel free to pop in some questions. And as we wait for those to come in, I wanted to bring up one question that we've gotten in a lot of different variations about caregivers, whether that's grandparents, nannies, babysitters, friends. How can we create successful shared screen time strategies? Is it okay for a caregiver or a grandparent to use screens differently than you do at home? And what are some tips there?
Yeah, this is a really important question and a really hard one. It's similar to families that are also potentially separated or divorced, and there's different rules in the home. It's who are all the adults interacting with your child and how to create some rules around that. And I'm a really big believer in consistency for children. I think they really do well and yearn for that when they see consistency across environments. And this is not only consistency for caregivers, it's also even consistency in the way schools and the home use media. And if we have a very different rules at home with our media than the way kids are engaged with it at school, that's confusing for them. And so even just checking in with your school and how they're using it could be another way to start to create some consistencies there. But in terms of, I really encourage my families and have tried my own selves with caregivers to make sure they follow the same rules that we've set up for our kids in there. And so for most babysitters and nannies and caregivers that we've used with our family, we have a strict rule that the screens aren't an option. And because it walks a tricky line with them. Now, granted, I'm absolutely okay with watching a movie during sometimes. And so I'm talking about more things that I can't control, which I don't know what apps they're going to be using or what interfaces they're going to be on. But if I pick the movie ahead of time and have it teed up and ready to go for the babysitter or nanny, and it's a nighttime date night with, this kind of thing, I find that to be, A-okay. And it's sort of a special treat that the kids know that this is a babysitter and nanny here, and that's why we're doing it.
That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. So a couple of questions came in prior to this, and this is pretty true in my household right now. How should we think about kids watching sports on TV? So sometimes on the weekend, they'll watch with my husband. 2 games could end up going 4 or 5 hours. It's just kind of on the TV in the background. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it's a great one, and one I struggle with personally, as I love watching sports and love watching lots of sports. I think that sports watching can be one of those opportunities in terms of that joint engagement, in the sense of it could be the type of media. It's very similar to a movie where if you're watching it with your child and not just having it on in the room and left them to be watching by themselves, feels like it could be a healthy interaction and one that could stimulate conversation, could talking about things going on in the game and you know, whatnot. Um, my word of caution for sports is, if, and we all know this, is the commercials during a lot of sports could be very age inappropriate, and could introduce content, violence, or sometimes a lot of really violent previews of movies or things that go on that are maybe our 3 and 4-year-olds might not be ready to see. And so that's my big warning there. And so maybe a way to mute or pause during commercials or other things could be the safest way to engage that.
Thanks. And another kind of variation of this, which came up for me recently, I was going back in time and rewatching some videos of my oldest when he was a baby. And what really struck me in watching these videos was that the TV in our apartment was on a lot in the background. He wasn't necessarily watching the TV, but it was on, whether it was, whether it was the news or, a kid's program. Can you talk a little bit about that? Not necessarily watching the
Right.
program, but it's on in the background.
Great topic, and one that I think many of us are guilty with sometimes in our homes. I actually, notice this when I visit some relatives or others. I pay attention to it in terms of the TV's kind of always on, and I applaud some of these media use tools, as this is one of the prompts they think about in terms of when and how often is the TV on in the house, and it's again creating that self-awareness to recognize it, because actually you may not even really need it, and that's a really easy fix to turn it off, and making sure we're treating the television on as when it's time we're all sitting down and engaged and watching it, and not just something that's sort of in the background. And so I think it's one of those that we're shifting as I think a society to moving towards that more intentional time of watch and not just streaming the television, and it's a good one to pay attention to, and I think one that limiting it could be very helpful.
Great. One last question. How do you manage screen time with children of different ages? So if you have a 2.5-year-old and a 6-month-old, how do you manage that situation when it comes to screens?
That is a great question and a hard one. And it's, we all know if the 6-year-old, for example, is on the iPad watching something, and you have, let's, for example, a 15-month-old who they are going to find their way into that screen as well to see what's going on and what their siblings looking at. And so, and this just happened recently as I was together with my kids and their younger cousins, and my kids were doing some schoolwork on their iPad computers, and the younger ones, both of them 3 and under, immediately ran over to see what was that and what were they looking at. And so it's a really hard question. It's a really hard scenario to face, and I think just again being mindful of where are the spaces in your home, and when are the times that your older child may be engaging with media, and could there be an opportunity to be setting your younger one up with a different activity so that they also feel whatever they may be doing is engaging and fun.
Great, thanks. A question just came through about screen time and when children are sick. How do you manage that when you need them to be resting and be still?
Yeah, in my mind, that falls a lot into the not the norm in terms of what might be going on. I really hope that we all don't have a child who's sick all the time. So really another good example is in the doctor's office. So as a pediatrician, I see kids, I would say, I'm just making it up, but 75% of the time I walk in the room and the kid's on a screen. But I'm trying very hard, and I really am not passing judgment on that family, because keeping a kid calm in the doctor's office is really, really hard. And I would imagine that most families, that doctor's office visit is once a year or a couple times a year. And so that feels fairly appropriate. Again, when your child is sick, having them, watch a show or a movie, because, that's one of the only things that you may have at your tool. You're already now staying home from work, missing work and now you probably might need to be engaged in some things. Because it's an intermittent strategy, it feels appropriate to be okay with that and give parents a break on that.
Perfect, thanks. I need that. I needed that with a lot of sick children.
Yeah.
Um, a parent asked, does screen time before 18 months old contribute to potential ADHD risk?
Hmm. Good question. You know, there the study that caught my eye most around this topic or this question was another one that just came out this year in 2023. It was published in a journal that's kind of prominent in my field called JAMA Peds. And it looked at it was a large cohort study, which means they looked at a population. It was actually in Japan, so like 7,000 children age 1, so in this age range you're looking at, and they looked at how much screen time then led to any sort of delays or challenges at age 2, and did those last to age 4. It's one of the first studies that really looked at um, that kind of lasting effect of any sort of challenges that excessive screen time may have, and also what type of delays or problems they may have. And so what they found was that for the 1-year-olds that had the greatest sort of screen time, so some that had 1 to 2 hours a day and some that had 2 to 4 hours a day, had delays in communication and delays in problem solving at age 2. And for some of those that had 2 to 4 hours a day at age 1, those delays persisted to age 4. So that's a lot of screen time, 2 to 4 hours, but they saw some of these delays in as little as 1 to 2 hours as well at age 2. And so back to the question of, is this contribute to ADHD? I think about, ADHD as a complex diagnosis. It's not one that you just take a blood test and say yes or no. It's about sort of a lot of different things coming together, but challenges in problem solving, challenges in executive function, delays in that could start to look like ADHD like symptoms in some younger kids. And again, diagnosing ADHD at this age under than 5 is a challenge. And so I would say I have not seen a study that directly associates that, but I could see some of the skills, especially the social, emotional, executive function skills that some excessive screen time causes, could start to look ADHD-like.
That's interesting. Well, we are close to time. So I just want to thank Ryan for joining us. And just a reminder that we'll be emailing all of you a recording by tomorrow. You gave me a lot of food for thought, and I know I need to kind of beef up some of my rules around screen time. So thanks for that inspiration. And thank you so much for everyone for being here. And as always, feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thanks again. Thanks.